My great-uncle was a man by the name of Anthony Rossi. He was Sicilian, but he emigrated to Florida, and in 1947, he purchased a small orchard operation. He built that operation into an empire of citrus distribution that we know today as Tropicana. A few years after he passed away, my great-aunt came to visit my family in Arizona, and she brought with her a gift, a small grapefruit tree from my great-uncle's personal orchard. My mom planted that grapefruit tree in our backyard, and it was soon our favorite part of the landscape. The tree grew up, and so did I, and in 2007, I graduated from college. I came back to live with my family and figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I spent a lot of time staring at that grapefruit tree. I spent a lot of time wondering why we couldn't use our landscape to produce more food. It seemed pure and simple and good and right, at a time when everything in my life was uncertain. I moved to Los Angeles, and I ended up right back in food. Unexpectedly, I did not become a screenwriter, but instead, I connected with some of my friends from Iowa, and they were really interested in sustainable food. They brought me into it as well. I started reading books by people like Michael Pollan and Mark Bittman, and as I figured out how this country feeds and farms, I got really upset. It turns out that America's food supply is owned and managed by a small cadre of enormous corporations. And newsflash, they're reckless with our scarce natural resources. I'm talking about topsoil, I'm talking about fossil fuels, I'm talking about water in the West. These are big problems. The more I learned about this, the more alarmed I got, and I wondered who could hold them accountable. My friends and I thought maybe we could. We began to think about the logistics of food and wonder if we couldn't start some sort of entrepreneurial venture that would provide some sort of viable alternative, a participative food. The idea dawned on us one day. I was walking around the neighborhoods of Los Angeles, and it occurred to me that there's something wrong with society that sent this man out to the Central Valley to toil in some sort of inhumanly large, gargantuan farm, while we were at the same time paying this ghostbuster to clip our grass and to blow our leaves. All the while we're sitting at home wondering why our food tastes so boring and why our lives feel so empty. We began to envision a new Los Angeles. What if we could grow more food in our lawns? What if we could combine that field hand with that landscaper? What if we could imagine some sort of Los Angeles where ingredients for our dinner were picked fresh right outside our kitchen window? We imagined a Los Angeles where mobile urban farmers might help people to farm in their own yards, and perhaps one day these farmers could be as ubiquitous, as common to see on their service routes as mail carriers or parcel delivery trucks. We imagined a Los Angeles where it might be as common sense and obvious to build and maintain an intensive raised bed garden as it now is to build and maintain a swimming pool. And so we decided to refarm the city. We would build and maintain these intensive raised beds for people. We would deliver the harvest in a harvest basket at their doorstep every week. We would call this business, appropriately enough, Farmscape. And just a few friends and I took up shovels, and we decided to set out. It seemed insane, perhaps. But we did it. We tore up yards, and we put in gardens, beautiful gardens. And it's about this time that we figured out that we were on a quest. Let me tell you, as an English major, if you're setting out to restore fertility to a valley gone fallow, you are on a quest. And in our quest, we would soon face 3 dragons. Not literal dragons, of course. Not even people or entities. These dragons would be preconceptions about how we organize our food, land, and people, and how we should manage our food supply. The first dragon was simple disbelief, a kind of academic doubt that on a macro level, it was possible to feed a city from production within the city's borders. People would say, thumbs up. They would be excited that we were doing this good and noble thing, but I think many of them secretly doubted that it was a reasonable mission that we'd set out for ourselves. I think many of them thought, those kids are so idealistic. This will never work. What is a small garden plot compared to an enormous corporate farm? To them, we said, look to the island of Cuba. In 1989, when the USSR collapsed, the small nation, or island nation of Cuba lost its major trading partner, and they were no longer going to be able to import petrol or petrol-based fertilizers. Suddenly, they were going to have to feed their population with an entirely domestic food supply. They didn't fail. It took 3 or 4 hard years that they called the special period, but they were able to retool What they did was they turned back to organic agriculture. And they installed in Havana, the capital city, an intensive system of raised beds called organoponicos. The organoponicos in Cuba today is able to grow 600 million pounds of produce per year, which is enough to satisfy 90% of the produce demand of the city. In the United States, we have our own empirical example. Your grandma remembers this. The Victory Gardens of World War II were amazing. We asked our civilian population to start gardening at home in order to offset the resource crisis that was posed by the war, and 40% of the United States' need for fresh produce, vegetables, and fruits was provided by these amateur gardeners and home gardeners. And so we would be yield-focused. We knew we did not want to be edible landscapers. We did not want the food to be incidental to the landscape design. We wanted the food to be the landscape design. We wanted to do farm-forward landscaping. We aimed to get as much yield from every square foot as possible. Our goal was to get at least 3 to 5 pounds of yield per square foot per year. We studied polyculture. This is our second garden installation ever, and you can see how closely we're spacing the crops. The idea is if you plant lots of them together, you can get more yield and you can protect the entire bed from weeds. We learned more and more about gardening, and we got better and better at it. Here's our system of raised beds. We designed a modular system we thought was stylish. I don't know what you think. The idea was to standardize our practices so that it would be easy to scale and spread all across Los Angeles so that we could turn as much of the city back into a farm as possible. The next dragon we would face was grocery budgets. People would look at us and say, I don't know about this gardening investment. What's wrong with just buying produce at the grocery store? Why wouldn't I just go to the farmer's market? What about subscribing to a CSA? I can tell you that garden fresh produce tastes better, but it would be better for you to try it. I encourage you, if you've never tried it, to go out and have some garden fresh produce, and if I could make any special request, I'd ask you to eat a sun-gold tomato. Our clients have told us that the garden fresh produce is definitely better, and that they find themselves eating more vegetables than they ever did before. Better, their kids are eating more vegetables than they ever did before. Farmscape's even able to grow varieties of produce that you can't buy retail. Sometimes it's rare or ethnic varieties. We have a lot of chefs and gourmands and caterers who really appreciate the varieties that we're able to provide for them. But there's also a set of varieties of produce that the retail grocery store culture no longer provides because it doesn't ship well. Often the skin is too thin, or for whatever reason there's not enough shelf life. In a garden, there's no shelf life. In a garden, there's no distribution. We even endeavored to prove that our tomatoes were objectively delicious. This is my colleague with a Brix tester, and a Brix tester, if you don't know, measures the sucrose level in fruit. Vintners often use this to check their grapes before taking them to market. It means you've got a good fruit if you have a high Brix score. We checked our produce against the grocery store and the farmer's market, also heirlooms, in a head-to-head trial. And what we found was even the lowest Brix scores that the garden tomatoes got was higher than the highest Brix scores of either the grocery store or the farmer's market. A lot of people like having a personal connection to their farmer. They like knowing who's growing their food and how they're doing it. The Farmscape model offers a transparent food supply where you can just look out your back window and see exactly what's being done. There's something about being around growing plants. It's a feeling of life. And we've learned that many of our customers have adapted their routines. This is a common trend where they would take their cup of coffee out in the morning and stand in the garden and just look at the crops and contemplate life. Somebody once wrote that to have a garden is to have a future. It's my belief that gardens turn houses into homes. They build community. People ask questions when you build a garden. They get curious. You swap produce, you swap recipes, you invite people over to dinner. It's a conversation piece. The last dragon that we would face is the landscape itself. It's my belief that we're entering a new era of gardening. A new era of gardening is going to require a reboot. Most people, when they think of a garden, think of a grandma gardening. They think of their hippie friend Steve, who wasn't entirely growing food. To overcome this, in order for us to get full passage back into a city as stylish and trendy as Los Angeles or any of the other important cities of the modern era, we're going to need to develop some sort of new design, some sort of cosmopolitan gardening, because there's a lot of landscapes we won't be able to build gardens in otherwise. Farmscape has been function-focused, but we've done our best to also pay attention to the aesthetic side. This is one of our current installations, but I'll show you a few of my ideas for where we could go. This is a Romanesque garden bed. This is a garden bed designed by Anthony Gaudi. And for my generation, this is a Super Mario garden bed. My quest is not over. We have not refarmed all of Los Angeles. We have a little bit more than 100 customers to date, and we've grown approximately 25,000 pounds of food by hand the hard way. But I don't have all these dragon heads on the wall as trophies yet. So what do I think the future of local food production looks like? Where are we headed with urban farming? In some ways, I think the future looks utterly novel. I think that the internet era and gardening apps are going to change the way that we garden. This is an app that Farmscape's been working on with some of our talented coding friends in the Silicon Valley. We're hoping that it's going to allow people to design and manage gardens at a more sophisticated level. Apps like this will also bring more people into the activity. It'll be a lot more fun than reading a big stack of dusty gardening books, hopefully more successful. But in many ways, I think that the future of gardening also looks very much like the past. Sometimes progressive is actually deeply conservative. This could be a template landscape design for Farmscape customers in 2012. What it is, in fact, is a template landscape design for people moving to the Los Angeles basin in 1935. You'll notice in the upper left, there's a small fruit orchard, includes some citrus. I'm excited because Farmscape will be adding orchard culture this winter, which means that I'll be able to share with the people of Los Angeles my experience with the grapefruit tree. As I think about my great uncle, I sometimes wonder, is my venture and all my ambition of the last 3 years to disaggregate food production and to move us away from a food distribution model, to be disruptive in the agriculture space, is all that a rebellion against his legacy? Or am I perhaps walking exactly in his footsteps in trying to share a better food experience with the people who live in the city? It's likely, of course, that I'm doing a little bit of both. Thank you.